Hey folks, Joy Brooks with Email and Coffee. I'm talking to Jordan Jones today, and this is going to be up everyone's alley who's into either the Bible or archaeology, because that's the nexus of my guest. He is a Bible scholar and archaeologist at the University of Iowa, where he's a driving force behind a Bible and Archaeology, a project and podcast dedicated to getting scholarship into the hands of everyday people who really want to learn. So he came up through the classics, went to Portland Seminary, recently completed his PhD, and has been thinking carefully of the intersection of text, material culture, and the Near East. So Jordan, welcome. Tell us any place there where I got it wrong or anything you want to share.
No, that's perfect. I'm so happy to be here to get to talk about more of the intersection between all things that are Bible and archaeology, because it really touches a ton of stuff. And I'm happy to get to sit in a spot somewhere in between, looking east and west in the broader ancient Mediterranean, ancient Near East, Southwest Asia, whatever you want to call it, the region that has many peoples and cultures and texts and all types of stuff that comes together.
It really is, it's not just, I'm not at a point where I can finally say, it was the East that started it all, but it seems that it all came out of the East.
Well, some things, there are some things you can point at to go, this, for what we have, which is always the caveat that the archaeologist will give you of, based off of the materials that we have. There are some things, if we're pointing out towards where do cities start, the earliest cities that we have and the way that we might understand them, you're looking east. If we're looking for where do things, the texts that we know, the cuneiform tablets that we have left, where do these things come from? Some of the undertexts behind the stories that you know in things in the Bible or in Greek tradition have legs that walk eastward. So a lot of stuff comes together, but it is so interconnected through trade and thinking of the work of Eric Klein, right? These systems in the Bronze Age that definitely connect the world in a way that is not the same as today, but in some areas we can think more of the broad global culture in a way that disrupts they're all isolated, they are just talking amongst themselves ideas.
I'm not exactly sure where I got this concept, but from Klein, we have at the end of the late Bronze Age, we have a technology, which is bronze, and we have an energy source, which is olives.
Yeah.
And they're driving this global economy.
Yes.
Because, everyone's consuming olives in every which way and loose. It's energy, it's food.
Well, I just got to talk to Jamie Fraser, who is the director of the Albright Institute, and his specialty is the trade of olive oil in the Bronze Age. Because early on, the olive purpose, the purpose of the olive was that oil commodity. The oil economy is a very, very old thing, and the same trade routes and the same locations that participate in the oil economy today, what also did then. It was just a different kind. And so the role of olives, the domestication of olives, the trade of olive oil, be it for beauty purposes, be it for ritual purposes, eventually it moves into food grade and consumption, but not so early on, that you do have a real stitching together. And an interesting way that you can see how cities and communities get brought into or cut out of that trade system and the networks, and how that might connect into what leads to rises and falls and settlement patterns before we have things like a Bronze Age collapse. What is leading to some of the aggregation of people into cities? Does it connect to the trade in this way? What leads to cities getting cut out? Well, if the Egyptians are able to bypass the southern Levant and get their olive oil direct from a more northerly source without having to go inland, that might speak to some of the movements that we see that then might precipitate some other things. So it is really interesting to get to look towards what is a hard material culture. You have the remains from them, you have the production facilities, you have the remnants left over, and thinking again about Is it just the Egyptians? Well, yes, but also no. Is it just, well, what is a large power? What's a small power? It makes it more fun.
Yeah. And, because archaeology is right now at a point, again, where that needle, we're looking past that needle backwards, going, what's, where we thought there was a hard stop, it's not so hard anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it's getting interesting, more and more interesting. I was watching some news because I'm into UFOs, and Gallaudet ended some conversation where the question was, what's come out of this that is astounding, and he goes, Atlantis. I'm like, oh no, he's going to go off on that. Now Gallaudet is an ocean Navy ocean guy, so I'm like, okay, so whether it's true or not, right? We have a lot of people that are right now because of Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe, because of the Anatolia, where we are again reaching into this Atlantis myth. Where
it is always, it's always popular. It's always been popular since. I think it's Plato who introduced it in one of their, where the idea emerges from as the site, which gets lost and people think it comes from somewhere else. But when it's proposed here, it's one of these teaching tools and strategies that comes in. But that idea of how do we have the things, which has unfortunately deep roots in ideas of who is capable of doing what, that you see flourishing in early European scholarship, that surely if we don't understand how these things are built or how connections exist, then there must be one of these things that lives behind this, getting to the ideas that connect into like the Anunnaki and all this type of stuff and pyramids. And these recent studies that are talking about, we have found buried cities underneath the pyramids of Giza and another secret Sphinx. And it's like no, that's not what's there. But there's lots of good stuff that is there that this distracts away from, instead of saying, well, we actually can get to a better idea of how they were able to connect and do some of these things. What does a trade system look like that can facilitate how we have this stuff? It doesn't have to be this thought of secret knowledge and special alien or extra human or whatever individuals that go around the world and spread this. Individuals are traveling much more broadly around the world than we think of because of the trade networks, because you are sending olive oil or bronze or gold. Go through the Amarna Letters and you can see the kings complaining that you didn't send me enough gold. I asked you for gold, Egypt. It's supposed to be like the sand for you. And this is a letter coming from back and forth all over, reaching from the districts, that you don't have to have some non-human, special human thing doing this. The humans are making these trade routes themselves. Maybe not in the way that we do it now, but it existed. It's there. Talk about that part.
I can't remember where the shoes came from, but the shoes that were sent, I also don't remember. Was it the Hittites or was it the Assyrian? I don't remember. One of there are a pair of shoes that were sent as a trade item. Yeah. And he's like, I don't like these shoes.
I don't like these. Give me some more shoes. Or there's one where a king is complaining because I asked for a statue of gold and it's actually only gold on the outside. And the inside, I thought this was going to be solid gold, as was my understanding. Why is this? It's fun to get to see the little quibbles of the kings arguing with each other, or things like the receipts. There's the bronze receipt that's a complaint about the copper quality, that it's not as good as it was supposed to be, and you're a bad trader. You have some of these very high level people talking about this and people going down to just the business level, that there's the similarities there and the deep connections, deep trade connections in ways that make a lot of sense with the way we still live.
Right. And those are the throughputs that we're humans. This is how we do things. And there are some things that all humans do. And one of them is narrative, is make up stories.
Yeah.
And those stories don't come out of thin air. I mean, okay, they do, but essentially they don't come out of thin air. They're built on something that happened, and then we make them interesting because there's not a lot to do after the lights go out. It's not a lot going on. There's no TV shows, and it's not like everybody lived in the palace where they had entertainment. If you're living in the boonies and it's dark out and it's 6 o'clock and it's dark out, we all know what happens. It's like you make babies or you tell stories. So, you bring out the 3-string instrument and the pipe, and you tell stories and you make music and you hit the drums and it becomes a thing. That's what people do.
Yeah.
What people do. It's kind of fascinating. I was going to share a funny story. So I was listening to another podcast, and they're a podcast about etymology. So it's an English fellow and an American woman, and they talk about words and expressions and how they're different from England to the U.S. And they came to a point where they were talking about acronyms, and they said, "Oh, that's like an industrial technological thing that we do now." And I'm like, "Oh, but I beg to differ, because I think the Hebrews created the acronym, because there are so many things that suddenly you realize, oh, you mean that's an acronym? You mean they did that back then? Like, what is the name of God? If it's unnameable, let's call him Hashem, the name. But what is his name? Guess what, folks? It's an acronym."
Yeah, consonantal structures themselves are, in a way, an acronym. Like a Lamech is an acronym, that this is a thing dedicated to the king, that there is so much that gets compacted down into that some of them might work slightly differently. But yeah, the divine name is one that you have. There's much more that's laden into these things that we're going to truncate down into, if we're looking at Hebrew, right? We're looking at three symbols here that's going to bear a wide variety of meanings depending on how they get used.
Every time I learn something else, I realize, oh, you mean that's another acronym? Like the word Tanakh. It's not a word.
Yep.
It's three letters that mean 3 different things: Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim.
Yeah.
It's 3. I'm like, really? I'm like, stop, you're kidding me. They did acronyms back then. So you got, always through my business career, been in marketing. I would always be in a meeting with the IT crew, and they would always love to throw out their acronyms. Well, the this, that, and the other thing, and that. And I'm like, really? Like, I know what you're talking about, but don't do that. They would throw it out to trip us up, and I'd be like, oh my goodness, the ESP and the ITV and the people like to throw acronyms around, and so do the Hebrews. I guess they were name droppers.
Well, in a way, they are a different version of the IT group. If you're thinking of the scribal community and the elitism that gets to come in of our language lets us understand and you don't. And there's always who's actually reading and who's participating and more levels behind those things. But it is a part of that gatekeeping of information and what gets shared around the fireside, and how does that differ from what gets shared in the palace or in the temple? How much of it gets spread under every green tree and high hill, and what doesn't?
And then take the temple away and move a whole bunch of people to a land that's, slightly different, but not really different, Babylon, with other traditions, but not totally different traditions, but other traditions. Slap these two people together, and now they come back with all of this mysticism.
Yeah. And you get a lot of them that don't want to come back. Because life's pretty good once they have been settled, and you're there for enough time that you get to set up shop and you have a new residence, and the Persians come in and they do what they're doing, and there's a permission to go home, but it's not forced. That not everybody goes. So you then get into more of this, mysticism that comes in, the influences of Zoroastrianism, the influences of broader religious concepts, that split between good and evil that was not really present in this way, that suddenly, by the time we get down to Qumran, you have a hard division between the sons of light and the sons of darkness, and it is this very Zoroastrian equal type of split, that there are the battles between these things that come from somewhere, that emerge out of this period of exile and return and the changes that happen.
The three core ethical principle, that Micah is justice, love the kingdom, and walk humbly with your God. But with Zoroastrian, it's good thoughts, good words, good deeds. It's the same concept. And both of those concepts, take it out of the temple, take religion, faith, take it out of the temple and bring it to the ordinary man. So I can understand, what do you want me to do? I have to be loving. I have to, be humble. I have to do the right thing. Oh, okay, I got it. Those are simple. I think I could do those things.
What you get this, you get it showing up too in the Holiness Code. So if you're thinking back to your text in Leviticus and all of the rules that come to you from the book of Leviticus, what you can eat, what you can't eat, what you can touch and can't touch, gets associated with the priestly community. And the priestly source is what it gets called. But there's a subset within that, Leviticus 17 through 26, that's this Holiness Code that changes some of that. And they influence other texts too. They show up in other places. But a lot of what you see there is we're taking that stuff that is temple-centric. How are you doing sacrifices in the tabernacle or in the temple once it comes in? And Holiness Code is moving that out into, well, what does it mean for you in an agricultural space? How do you engage with this at home? Which leads people to argue different ways about the date of those kinds of things. But it does feel kind of compelling that you're looking at concerns of either an unlanded, you are in exile, or being resettled, and what does the temple mean to you? And if you have lived without it, how concerned are you about it? And if you are not so keen on the one that's been set up, because it's really, they say it's not that nice until Herod does what Herod does, well, what does it look like for you to get to keep doing this at home? And suddenly those rules pick up some of those, how am I going to go about living this? And how do I really do it in my own house? And that spread, that holiness spread, that it's no longer just about the priests in the temple, but it is about you. And it is about you and your house and you and your relationship to the land, or the land will spit you out, which is a difference that comes in. Well, it also gives something very different to the thought of what the value and the role of the land is, compared to if you think through the way the land reacts early. There's the crying out, really, if you go back to the flood. Oh, there is this cry that comes up, but it's not the same as if you do these things, what does it pollute? It doesn't just pollute the tabernacle anymore. It pollutes the land, and the land is going to be that agent that expels you. It's not the divine that has promised you this land. And so you're moving, you can see the little ways they start to move these things. So no, it's not that. It's going to be the land that expels you, as it expelled the people that were here before you, according to the tradition.
It's very fascinating, because once you start reading through it and you start also comparing it to other stories that were getting recorded, you begin to see similarities, not specific, but sort of style similarities. For example, when you're reading the Iliad and they go through the catalog of ships, and you're like, really? Is this something they read to each other? Like, where did this come from?
Well, one individual wanted to be buried with it. They found that recent mummy that it was later Roman, but it had the catalog of ships. Now, whether it was just in there to help desiccate the body or whether it was preserved, they're looking at. But yeah, somebody liked it enough, apparently, right, or hated it enough that they wanted to get rid of the page.
It's an odd insertion into the book where, we're talking about the wrath of Khan, I was going to say.
Sing goddess, the wrath of. Yeah, you have, which you do get some of these that are broad similarities that you're mentioning. Some of these, we have ideas of storm deity, and how can we see parallels in storm deity language in the Hebrew Bible to what you might have associated with Baal, or what you might have associated with El and locations on mountains, or physical locations, or rider on the clouds. The one that is coming in, if you think to the story of Elijah looking out over the ocean and the storms are rolling in, these storm deity ideas. But you also have some that are kind of, maybe it's not like a nail in the coffin, but are sometimes pretty specific, like the idea of Moses being drawn out of the river in a basket, when you then go and look at Sargon's origin story of being the one that is placed into a basket and floated down the river, or Saul and the bringing up of the prophet. And then you go over and you look at Odysseus and the Nekia tradition and bringing up Tiresias. And there are a lot of very close parallels with how the seer is presented, but inverted. And so you have some of these that really feel like they're playing with the literature, which is when people start to make those polemic arguments. Are they doing this on purpose? Is this a polemic? Are they repurposing these things? Is it just accidental?
It's a style. It's something, that catalog of ships is the whole, how to build a temple.
Yeah.
What kind of clothes do you wear in the temple? Exactly tell me what I should be wearing. I mean, so detailed that I could go to a tailor and have him make it. What does the temple look like? When you go into the temple, what should it be like? So, you've got these things where, as I said, you've got a story, the Iliad and the Odyssey, and suddenly we've got this insertion where we're talking about a catalog of ships. Like, okay, like I said, is that entertaining? And where did that come from?
Well, you have a similarity too. It could be the description of the construction. It could also be when you run across these massive genealogical sequences. You're reading through narrative and suddenly you have the begets and the begets and the begets. And why do we have this in here? Which they could be filling space, which probably not because of the value of the materials that they're writing on. But those types of genealogical sequences become very popular in the 6th to 4th century, these ideas of how do we construct our identity, and they become a thing that the priests use to give structure to the narrative. How can we condense time? How can we jump ahead in time? A genealogy can serve that purpose. A genealogy can give backstory to give you the context of who a character is going to be without having to say it, in a way that the catalog of ships gives you that quick run of who is the idea, our idealized version of this thing that we say happened, who gets to participate, who gets to claim credit for having an ancestor that was there, what is our sense of the world, what does our sense of a military might look like, how big of a force can Agamemnon really muster in order to set up. You can muster all of those people, and yet you can't keep Achilles in line. So it does some of these other things for us to then say, these are the people that are willing to bend the knee. And yet when this one shirks, the system almost breaks. So how important is he? How strong is Agamemnon's hold really? What is the idea of heroic value? It starts to open up other doors, in addition to introducing a bunch of vocab that you hate to see if you're doing this on an exam and you get given a part of the catalog of ships and you're just, most of this is something that I only need to know if you're doing this section. And so you don't skip it, but if you want to skip it, you're okay.
What is fascinating is that is it some of our very first attempts at history, because first of all, there's a lot of propaganda, so you have to understand that the Egyptians did it. If they didn't win, then you don't know about it.
Yeah.
And if they
tell you they win anyways.
I was gonna say, if it was sort of kind of stalemate, they won.
If it's a tie, we won, and it's a mutual breakup. The breakup was mutual, maybe more mutual on one side than the other, but we came out the better.
We came out the better. So, you're going to get those stories there. So, but the point is, as you go through the stories and they tell who fought where and when they fought and who brought what and how many people were there, millions of people. It's like, where are these people coming from? Obviously, they don't know how to count, or we don't know how to count. But in any case, there were these chariots from so-and-so, and he brought his horse, and they all go through this. And it's important they're telling the history. That is a concept of their history, validating that they were there, who was there. Yeah. These are the witnesses, and also ways for us, when we look back, to say, oh, guess what? There really were Trojans. Or, or I shouldn't say there really were Trojans. When you look at the list of, the list of ships, you're going through, well, who are these people? Where did they come from? Look, this is mentioning these people. These people are these people from, mentioned in this in the Hittite script, or in in the Egyptian story, or it's sort of like, oh, there is something going on here. It's the first beginning of catalogs.
You have a catalog process. And the question you mentioned, like, is this our first history? Which it might be. And the mythology and history overlap. If you go to somebody like Hesiod as well, of introducing history, or in what way is Thucydides gets called a historian, Herodotus is a historian or a father of lies, depending on who you ask. What exactly history means is slightly different, but a part of it too, in addition to saying, yeah, maybe we can pin in some of these names, or you have to ask the question, are these people that are known later retrojecting themselves into a text? How early is Homer? How late is Homer? Another wrinkle on it, though, is that value of the text for a scribal institution is something like a catalog of ships or the catalog process itself. Does it exist to give a sense of history, or does it exist as a scribal enterprise to teach you the way you construct these types of things? How do you say someone came from someplace? Let me give you a list. Do you know your vocab for your ships and your chariots and your numbers? And we see some of this in cuneiform tablets. Here is the list of, you learn your vocab in this order. You learn all your trees. Then you learn all of your stone implements. Then you learn your numbers. And as it builds out, the practices that they have are things like these catalogs. And so, the story of so-and-so went to some place and brought him X amount of things. And they can do both things, right? Those myths serve a training purpose for the scribes. They serve a purpose of memory for the community who is engaging with them. They can serve a purpose of history, and how does that overlap with mythology depends on who you ask, and how that fits into collective memory if you buy into that idea or not. That they overlap in ways that can be really disputed, and sometimes people talk about them so differently if you're talking about Homer versus if you're talking about Hebrew Bible, and if you're talking about Egypt, or you're talking... The attack that someone takes is not always consistent depending on how they feel about that text or that community or that period of time. You move out of the Bronze Age and into the Iron Age, and sometimes people start to talk much more certainly about what we can know or what we can have. We've moved out of the murky mists of history, when in reality we're still very murky on a lot of stuff. Where did these people come from? What led to the move from the highlands down? And why did they do this? Well, we don't know. But we can see that there had been settlement patterns, and then those stop and they end up somewhere else. And maybe that fits into Bronze Age collapse. Maybe that fits into drought. Maybe that fits into large conflicts, or stories like this that maybe get preserved of the fights between city-states. How is this? Is it history, or is it memory, or both?
That's has been, we might argue that Alexander took the Iliad and the Odyssey as Bible, but
yeah,
I would say that for the most part, people accepted the fact that the Iliad and the Odyssey were a little bit of history and a lot of story.
Yeah, you see a lot of play. This is, in the field of classics, one of those debates that people have. How seriously did they take the texts, the mythology? When you see the stories of the gods that feel, compared to some other stories, very irreverential of the way you depict these people, and the heroes and the demigods, how well are they portrayed? And as you move down into things like the plays, how they lean into some of these older traditions, and they're flexible, they can adapt some of them. That feeling of it is different. Is that because they didn't think it was real? They didn't hold it to be true? Or they had a different sense of freedom of what you're allowed to do with that than what was permissible in another context. So they may still hold a similar idea of reality to it, but a different permissibility of creative expression in how we are allowing ourselves to engage in it that just looks different, that then might lead us to think they feel a different way about it. I mean, these are the places where people, they spend all of their time fighting, and what do we really know? And even when you have evidence of cultic activity in any context, that can't tell you what someone believes. It can show you that someone participated in an activity at a site, but what it can't tell you is why they did it. If I go to the Trevi Fountain and I throw a coin into it, why did I do that? If an archaeologist finds all those coins in the future, oh, look, they came here to offer their ritual offerings to this fountain because of who's pictured here. So all these individuals are petitioners, they participate in this cult. Or maybe they're just tourists, and this is a thing you do. You put a lock on this bridge when you go past it and you're in love. Are you worshiping the god of the river god that is below this so they don't eat your beloved? Or you do it because it's a thing you saw on Instagram. And the context there might change, but we run into a limit. You have bones. Was it a meal or was it a sacrifice? It can be both. They can sacrifice it and then feast it. Well, does the sacrifice exist to feed the god? Or do we have an excuse of why we need to kill this cow, but it's a really big, or this goat? We're going to kill the prize goat. It's a big financial hit. But I really want to eat it. And it would be nice to have a feast for the community because we depend on each other. But it might be easier to justify it if it partakes in a sacrifice first. And I feed the deity. I give so that you may give this back to me, and now I feed my community. Which one of those is more important? We'll never know because we don't know what they think. We can just see that there was something that took place, and there's texts that might describe some of it, but those come from very few hands and say nothing about the larger popular practice of these materials, be it Greek or Roman or Egyptian or wherever you want to go.
Sacrifices always irk me. And I'm talking about human sacrifices. So when I'm reading in the Bible and we're talking about sacrifices, what? Isaac?
Yeah.
Abraham. And and this happened only recently, came to mind was Agamemnon.
Yeah.
Story.
Iphigenia.
Like, oh, holy moly.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same tradition. They're
Jephthah.
arguing the same thing. It's
Yeah.
like, what is this? Why do we do this? And needless to say, it doesn't end well for Agamemnon at all. And it just keeps on going. It doesn't stop. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, this is very fascinating. Now, a lot of us will say, oh, well, the Mayans or the Olmecs or whatever, well, they sacrificed. Did they? How do we know this? What act was it? Obviously, we're talking about lots of different cultures across the world. So there's something happening, something very human. And are we actually sacrificing our children? What's going on there? What's the story behind that one?
Yeah. If this Agamemnon and Iphigenia, which you have a version where it happens, you have the version where she gets taken away, and you can see the discomfort that grows over time with, did we really do this? Are we okay with doing this? Which you can see with the binding of Isaac. And if you poke that text, did Isaac always make it off the altar? Maybe, maybe not. Abraham and Isaac walk up together, and it's very explicit that the two of them are walking together, and you have this back and forth, and they walked. And if you look back at the text when Abraham goes to leave, he leaves. And if you look at the Hebrew, he is walking, but it's in the singular now. And so did Isaac leave with him? And people will argue, well, he's the primary character here, and so it defaults because of the style of narrative. That's possible. Or maybe it's possible that the hand always didn't get stopped. Because if we look over at Jephthah, no one steps in to save Jephthah's daughter from, according to the text, being sacrificed. And that is the version that stays, which then gets argued about later for what happens to Jephthah. Well, his downfall becomes explained by his willingness to sacrifice his daughter, and so his parts fall off as he walks throughout the country as his punishment. And it leads to the downfall of my favorite guy, Phineas, because he didn't stop Jephthah from sacrificing his daughter, and that's what leads to his. And you have this, we did, but maybe we didn't, before you even get into the debates that go around, what does it mean to these references of passing children over the fire? And is that a tie into broad ideas of child sacrifice? Or Christine Garraway has a very interesting read of this, that it might be more about broader burial practices and not specific ideas of child sacrifice, because they're not child sacrifice to Molech, this idea of a deity, but as a Moloch sacrifice, this type of burnt offering that we see in Punic practices. And this reference there that gets confused and tied back and forth. But cremations are not something that you see in ancient Judah. This is not a burial practice that takes place. It is something that you see on the coast. It is something that you see in Phoenician areas, north and south. And so is this type of, we don't do this, one of these divisions? Burial is a part of that household continuation idea. Identity gets tied in. Your personhood doesn't end then. And so you're not going to participate in personhood activities that are associated with not us, where they are willing to cremate. We don't cremate. And so is this actually about doing these things, or is this a prohibitive practice over burial? Which doesn't really then say maybe anything about that willingness to sacrifice earlier, when you have the explicit command in the text to offer your firstborn. And no caveats given for, it's whatever opens the womb. It's only later that it becomes you're going to redeem your children. The early versions of that is it's the firstborn. The firstborn are mine, says the Lord. And eventually, well, the Levites are going to be the ones that they are participating as, and they're dedicated over. Even there, though, the Levites become the Levites because of the participation in violence. They're the ones that pick up the sword after the golden calf, and it's through violence and the slaughter that they become this group. And so even if they are then the set apart, it's still tied into an idea of sacrifice, that is this shedding of blood that stops the divine wrath after the golden calf. So it still doesn't go away. It just moves a little bit into a version that we're okay with, where now it's sacred violence. And the sacrifice is a part of this, the shedding of the blood. The life is in the blood is the Lord's. The blood can be poured out on the ground, but it can't be consumed. The blood, you have all these little overlapping things that get really uncomfortable, and all the more when we think of it now, because it's that, would they do this?
I sometimes wonder, is it also a way to explain the death of so many young children, that babies that we're talking about death, a lot of death,
extremely high death. Yeah.
So you've got, your young wife who's 15 years old, and she's, giving birth to her first baby, and she dies. Well, Fortunately, we have 5 other wives, but in the meantime, how do we explain this? You
have the infant mortality rate, and this is something that's hard to calculate, that people look at based off of what do we know about the size of households, how many people might a household have been able to hold. If we're looking at family burial sites, how many people are there, to try to build a sense of what a household would look like. And the estimates there are 50% of children don't make it out of that first year, or even a little bit lower. And then an additional 50% of those that remain don't make it to adulthood. So it's an extremely high death rate for what would be classified as children in the ancient world. And so does a sacrifice there, as you give of the land in the hopes that the land bears fruit for you next year, I'm giving something back, or of the flock. This is that back and forth gift of the way sacrifices. Why would humans be viewed differently, especially when we're looking at it through a household lens, which does speak of individuals, but it's also a concern about property. It's a concern about that line of what is a person and when do they become a person is murky. And what is your value as a person, which doesn't mean that people don't love you, but your value is also as a member that can contribute to the household, which is an idea connected to fertility. And we have all these rules about fertility and the things that get offered of this, that maybe you have this, you're mentioning too, the death of young mothers or the death of children. People look at the popularity of jar burials in households in the late Bronze Age, Middle Bronze to late Bronze, and ask, what is the value of it? Why is this? Is this a rewombing of the child? Is this because the household is a matriarchal space and they want to keep that lost child close? Is this because we hope that by interring the dead child here, they may protect future children to almost stave off death because we've already lost? Is it all of the above? Well, we start to get into this space where it's a dangerous and a difficult time, and something that is dangerous to the child that dies, to the mother, but it's also precarious for the entirety of the household because it is a subsistence lifestyle that needs a lot of hands in order to work the fields and work the crops. And so what is the value of a child? Well, you want many quivers, many arrows in your quiver, because you need a lot of hands on the plows and you need a lot of grain. If your diet is 50 to 60% cereals, it's a lot of time harvesting. It's a lot of time grinding and baking bread in order to survive.
Making flour. I know for a fact because I tried to make flour from what was it, barley. I was like, oh my God, this takes a long time.
Hours a day.
Hours, and I still didn't get to flour, so I don't know how they did it.
Well, Carol Meyers, if you're interested, listeners, in learning more about bread, because I don't know why you wouldn't be, Carol Meyers has done so much wonderful work here in estimating out, well, how many hours a day? It's like 6 to 8 hours a day that you're going to spend grinding. But this isn't solo activity. This is communal activity, both your household and mutual households working together, because we have these kinds of grinding installations that are present between households, where it seems individuals would gather communally to grind, to share that labor, and to bake the bread. And it's a matriarchal activity. We also have evidence of this, not just in, well, here are the things. How do we know who does it? You can see the microfractures in the forearms from the process of this repetitive activity. The evidence is in the bones of the trauma that it produces doing this all day, every day. And out of that, you have the signs, and you also have a new system of power that emerges, very possibly, because this person controls your livelihood. Your ability to survive is based off of the bread that they make. So you have a patriarchal text and a matriarchal household. So is it the house of the father? Sometimes it's also the house of the mother. And one of those people is putting the food on your plate that you need to live. So if you're not going to the temple, who might you be turning to as the one connected to your livelihood? And that then bridges back over to, well, how are you then connected to the divine? In the divine keeping me alive, and opens new doors for cultic control in the household.
This is why the Bible fascinates me. It's not just the surface level stories, and it's difficult for any of us to read and to start digging underneath. It's difficult because when I read a book, I've often said I might not be as technical as other people who come reading the same book and they're coming out, well, Tolkien means this. I'm like, well, wasn't it just a story about little people and magic? Because no, it's a story about this. I'm like, I guess I have to read that over again. But that's what these stories are doing. All of these stories that are coming out of the Iron Age are really dense. I mean, we're talking about not only condensed years where you've got one story that essentially is coming out of 5 different eras. You've got a story that's telling you, basically telling you what to do in a situation, telling you what these people did, telling you how you're related to those people, telling you where these people went, telling you who's your friend and who's not your friend. I mean, it's so many different layers. You can read it and read it and read it, and then finally you put a whole bunch of stories together and you get a totally different story. Yeah. That's why I love the classics. And when you put them all together, I'm talking about all of the stories that are coming out of, let's call it the Aegean, I don't know, the Mediterranean, all those stories that are coming out of all those peoples, it really becomes this fascinating cultural soup. And when I think of it this way, the lights never went out at the end of the late Bronze Age. It wasn't like, Miriam turned around and said to Shlomo, well, that's the end of the good times. What are we going to do tomorrow? I don't know. We're not going to have any bronze. And there's, it wasn't like that. They kept going.
Yeah.
They didn't stop. So
the big cities change for sure. But that's not everybody.
Lights went out in Ukraine. That's for sure.
Yes, we have some of those big things, and then it's a redistribution of population and power that emerges again in some forms that are similar to what you had in the late Bronze Age, with some sites of power returning, but not at quite the same scale, almost as if they maybe have learned some of the lessons, maybe not some of the others as well, of like what leads to the fall. But the texts are, they are so multi-layered. You pick a thing you want to chase and you can find one. And a hard part about it, especially if we're looking at a biblical text or if you're looking at the texts of Greece, depending on which one you're more familiar with, is assuming the ending that you are most familiar with when you read it and missing everything else because you go, oh, yeah. We talked about Abraham and Isaac. I know how this one ends. He doesn't die. Okay, and now I read through and you're expecting that. But if you can step back and say, let me not assume the end and ask new questions of this, or put it in conversation with, well, let me take another thing off the shelf that they might have had in mind when they're hearing this story. Do they know a story where a child doesn't make it off the altar? And if so, does that subvert expectations in a new way if this child doesn't make it off the altar or if this child does make it off the altar? If we read that with Jephthah, with Iphigenia, what happens now? What if we add somebody like a Persephone, who isn't sacrificed but is given over to the underworld, which is a similar type of thing, because now getting to stay there is how we have fertility on the earth. So that is a sacrifice of sorts, but a different. It's that child dedication. Oh, well, now what if we put that with, do we have anybody that dedicates a child to divine service in order to, we do have these types of traditions that come on. And now you get those different ideas of, I think Northrop Frye calls it circling the wagons, that these stories give you different ways of circling the wagons together to say, this is what makes us us. And there are many different wagon trains out on that prairie who are circled around different fires, telling the same story with slightly different bends. And those senses of identity can change significantly stepping from one to another, even though you're telling the same story, but usually have a lot of the same concerns that underlie them, which, going back to some of what we talked about earlier, where does it come from? Does it come from the East first? Maybe. Does it come from natural human concerns? Maybe. It gets hard once you try to put dates on things. Like, if you look towards what does the text seem to know, what does the Hebrew Bible seem to know about Torah before Ezra? It's not a ton. When Ezra comes back and starts, hey, this is what the text says, the response of the people is kind of like, that's new information to us. I guess we'll go along with it. So how much of this is latent earlier on and may reflect some of that? How much of it is a product of the Persian period or of the Hellenistic period? And if it is, well, how do we need to be then accounting for things that are also flourishing in those time periods, which doesn't preclude things from being recollections or built on archives from stuff that is earlier. You can look at some kings in the Hebrew Bible, yes, and see, oh, hey, Sennacherib says this, the text says that. They're not in perfect agreement, but we do have the evidence that a siege took place. We've got evidence from Lachish that some of this matches the reliefs. We have a correspondence here on a payoff that takes place. Okay, here we go. Or things like Yehu kneeling down and having paid tribute. Things like the Mesha stele, that, there really was a fight that took place here that actually does go the way of Moab, which the text surprisingly preserves, even though child sacrifice again pops up in that one, because that's a place where it works. They offer the firstborn of the king, and the battle turns in their favor. So you get some of this that's still preserved later on, even if it comes later, or parts of it come later. It can still have ties, but just in what way to what comes earlier? It gets murky, a little murky.
Well, it serves a purpose to have stories, because we as humans tell stories, so we're going to be telling stories. Now, when they get written down, they get redacted, edited, retold, re-edited, and then they shift between culture.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got the flood myth in 50,000 translations. Obviously, there's a flood somewhere. Is it a local flood? Is it a big flood? What kind of flood? What are we talking about? Floods happen to every place on the planet.
Yeah.
So are they just talking about, oh, you know what? It was a bad season, we had a flood. Is that it? Or was there, the Younger Dryas, was there some obscene flood?
Cataclysmic event. Yeah, the widespreadness of some of these traditions, like a flood, these major catastrophic events that are going to leave such a deep cut on the landscape for whatever scale it takes place, as well as the people that survive it. There might be, is there a global flood the way that Genesis describes? We don't have evidence to support that. Is there the very real possibility that there are what would be cataclysmic local floods? If you're thinking of your life in a much more reduced manner and the fringes of your world are narrower than what we think of as the fringes of our world. We are talking across the internet in a way that makes absolutely no sense to me, but it really expands my idea of what could be local. But if you are one of these people that's living in a condensed settlement area, a local flood is a world-destroying flood. If it destroys your crops, that's the end of your life. And you have this popping up in lots of places and in ways that are different. Even in the Hebrew Bible, you get true flood traditions that are preserved together and woven into one place. That those moments seem to fit that category well to me of this collective memory, that there is something that sits behind this, that we at some point in time experienced a thing. Over time, though, the fish that I caught can always get bigger. And so maybe the flood itself continues to get bigger because then the story of the hero also grows. That survivor or the divine intervention or lack thereof can also grow in the sense of how do we respond to each other. It has room to expand or retract in that redactional process because maybe we've run across now the story of a flood myth in Greece and we're throwing stones over our shoulder to create new humanity at the end of that versus it's my children, or a Gilgamesh and Upnachim and what happens there and your ability to survive because of the subversion of the gods by the gods instead of divine intervention on your behalf? Are you fighting the flood, or trying to steer against the winds, or are you in the palm of the divine and resting on it? Suddenly you get those, again, in that circle, the same story is being told, but now the hero wins by trickery or the hero wins by divine election. And what does that say about us if that's who we trace ourselves to? As well as then what it says about those who we want to not be us, because once they got off that boat and Noah got a little bit drunk, someone did something. And those people we don't like, even though we might have a undeniable connection to them. They are on the wrong side of our story. And you open up then new levels of internal identity and external identity through those shared stories in ways that you could imagine. You're walking by, maybe you hear these people telling the stories and you go, oh, I know this one. And then you run into that, wait. I don't have that part. Who were you? Or how exactly did you come to this? And the redaction and the re-redaction and who gets to hold the pen last really has a lot of power. So what version of this existed that didn't make it in, we have no idea. But we can see through things like the materials at Qumran, through texts that are things like Jubilees, rewritten Pentateuchs, rewritten Bible materials, that there is ongoing creative response to the texts where they continue to adapt and change and add explanation for how did we get here. You see this in the Targums, you see this in Jubilees, you see this in Aramaic Levi, all of these different people coming back to these stories to say, we care about this, but we need it to say a little something different to us in ways that is more than just looking out. Also, it also looks in.
Stay here. Get lawn mowing. Okay, you stay in here, good girl. So I was thinking when you were talking about flood, how often does that area, we'll call it, I don't know, let's call it Palestine. Let's call it, that area, have floods. Not something really popular there. However, it is if you go further east, Tigris Euphrates.
Yeah.
Or if you go to the Nile, further west. Not real popular in Israel. It's not like we're hearing every year, oh, the landslides after the rain season. I mean, they have a rainy season. It's not a flood season.
which opens those.
Native to the area.
Yeah, where does this story come from? Does it emerge out of a context that the Nile Delta floods is probably something people are familiar with, that it's irregular. You judge your agricultural year based off of it. You need a high flood in order to have a good harvest. But too high of a flood is deadly as well. So it needs to be just right. And if it gets too big, is this drawing on memories or traditions of that? The local idea of the flood is less common, but we do know that there are, the flash flood. What is when a wadi overruns and flash floods? So is this built off of what maybe was a much more narrow idea of a destructive event connected to water that can expand, and it was built off of one of these flood experiences? We see some idea of flooding or the impact of rain if you go to the text of Deborah, where in the battle it is the rain that then allows them to overthrow. And so is this a flood? No. But it does enough to upturn and create mud, so these high rain events can still do something. Or does it reach even further back, as you mentioned, some of these earlier periods of time, that if we are seeing evidence of significant change to the landscape because of a previous movement, what led to the creation of something like the Dead Sea, either the plate tectonics that have created this type of sink, but also we have varied levels of lake there, depending on rainy seasons and periods of flooding and movement of waters in the past, that the agricultural landscape or the particular climate has similarities to the past, but in some ways different. But those types of things do, I think, point towards that broader pulling for creating these stories that may draw some on our experience, but also those broader experiences of other regions or regions where maybe we have come from.
It's definitely a shared DNA.
Yeah.
Definitely. And not only that, we today, there are some buzzwords that drive me off the face of the earth, and the discussion on colonizers makes me insane, but it's not something that is only current. We're talking about, if you want to talk about the late Bronze Age, we're talking about thousands of people that are boating or walking this way or that way constantly. So, you talk about the Philistines, and you talk about, okay, let's just talk broader about the sea peoples. Mm-hmm. Where did they come from? Where did they come from? Eric
Klein would love to have a specific answer. If you've got it, send him a note. They seem to be.
We call them today the colonizers.
Yeah, well, you
colonizers.
Have some of them, where the sea peoples are a diverse mixing. They get that name because of their study, but we have more specific names for them in Egyptian records, and they don't all come from one place. It is this band, this group that has either accidentally or intentionally banded together, but not always. Sometimes they're showing up individually as well in response to that mix of factors that is societal collapse, the change to climates, drought, all of these things that culminate in mass migration. Is some of this an attempt to colonize? Because we do have the creation of colonies. If you go towards the Greek system, colonization is an extremely popular process within the ancient Greek world. It's how they built their trade networks.
How they got rid of all the troublemakers.
So you have,
get out of town.
You send them there, and it's a way we can expand trade. So we know that this exists. So are some of these individuals doing that? Maybe. Some of them might be more like refugees. Are they fleeing a place that has collapsed and they have no choice but to relocate? And the way they might be able to survive is to band up with a group like this or follow in their wake, that there is a pointy end of the spear that goes in that might be those more aggressive, I am going to come in and raid and take resources, that opens the door for someone to come in later and say, I now have a place to settle. It's not a one-size-fits-all when we look at them, but you have that phase. You also then have the impact of imperial powers and the way that they use resettlement and repopulation and deportation to exert the imperial will and to try to stabilize a region, to prevent or attempt to prevent rebellions by doing settlement relocation and reassignment of identities according to those things. So colonization is by no means new. And a lot of the ways it happens or is the same as how it has happened. A lot of the things that lead to it are continuing old ideas too.
We've got Assyrians, Hittites. There's a group that I keep forgetting. Begins with an M.
The Mari?
Anyway, we've got peoples. We've got peoples in Anatolia, down to the Fertile Crescent, that are constantly moving, resettling, taking over, losing, moving, taking. There's a period in time where it becomes so messy that it's like who's on first, what's on second.
Yeah.
Because if you we didn't even know that the Hittites existed until what? How many years ago? 20,
until
30 years ago?
we knocked on to a city and you went, oh, there's a bunch of stuff here. I think Mitanni is maybe the M that you're thinking of.
Mitanni.
Yeah. You
And
get
the
this.
Hurrians. Like, I always get confused. Mitanni and the Hurrians. Because that's what I'm saying. We still don't know. Like, did they speak Hurrian and they were Mitanni? Or were they...
The lines are hard. And it is one of those things that you come upon a city and the texts that are associated with it accidentally through archaeology. And now there's a treasure trove of documents that speak towards another perspective. We don't just have an Egyptian view on it now. We have things that come from their own, and we're not reliant just on Amarna. But their lines of power really aren't clear, which a parallel that people might be more familiar with too is thinking of, try to imagine in your mind what the Hebrew Bible thinks about the boundaries of kingdoms, how it describes itself either as a united monarchy or divided. Those lines are far from clear. And sometimes it is this city that is our boundary marker. Sometimes it is others. That expansion over time isn't really certain. And it's that small give and take between these powers that the Assyrians are, as they exert and they expand under one ruler, their boundaries can become more expansive. But if you have someone who is more focused on another region, that space is up for grabs. And it might still technically be Assyrian, but if we can expand ourselves into that space and make it ours, or I as a vassal king underneath the Assyrians, well, I'm not taking Assyrian territory, but I'm able to subjugate under myself a smaller local power. And it's still all Assyria. We're all under the Assyrian rule, but now you pay towards me and to them. And then I will take what you pay me to help offset what I have and send it their way. And who really owns it then? The Assyrians, I guess, they would say. But if you ask the local ruler, it's going to be, that's our thing. The same way if you go towards, you see this type of politicking in the Amarna Letters, where the kings are saying they're the most loyal. And hey, Pharaoh, you need to come smack down this other local ruler for me. You're the big king. But when they talk among themselves, they call themselves the kings. Because now you are ruler over this little part and you are underneath me. And the limits of those types of kingdoms are not hard and fast by any means. And it gets even weirder if you were to try to think the people who were there in those cities that might be in the fringes of their territory, what sense of any relationship to this do they have? They have to pay a tribute or a tax to somebody. Does it matter if it's going to the Assyrians or it's going to the Egyptians or it's going to the... It's getting taken one way or another. The payment rates are largely the same. It stays pretty consistent because if we overdo it, you're going to break the system. So do they really care? They probably care the most that you don't come in and burn everything down and kill them. And so if I have to pay, I've got to pay. Here you go. That part continues on. But we hear about the part from the people who live in the cities that, well, if my boss changes, I might lose my head. So I really am interested in preserving this style and this story to justify why my guy is the right guy and those guys are the bad guys.
Sort of tells the story of covenant.
Yeah.
Because we've got different, I guess, hierarchies of covenant, but contracts are contracts.
Mm-hmm.
Who you pay them to. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it ends up taxes, but it's who I pay my allegiance to at some
Protection
point.
money. It's
Protection money.
yeah.
And
Suzerain vassal treaties are just mob boss shakedowns of we talked about Sennacherib. I am here to besiege your cities because you stopped paying your tribute. And your options are to pay me and I'll leave your city intact, or don't pay me and I will burn it to the ground like I did to everything else. So it's a way to exert power and to pay the armies that then go and have to exert power on people who have also stopped paying because you took all of the military force from here to move it over there because they stopped paying, and now this person is going to stop paying. So it's a system of whack-a-mole. But that suzerain vassal agreement is very much that type of, it's not an alliance, but in some ways it's a relationship that says, I am paying you this tribute in the expectation that you keep the other local powers around me in check. And what is mine stays mine, and you are my benefactor. So if they come and beat me up, I'm calling in NATO, which is you, the Assyrians, to come and exert force on my behalf on them. And most of the time, the threat of it is enough, because if they have to get out of bed and march all the way over there, they're usually not just there to do the shake our fist at you on the wall and say, we'll be better next time. Usually it is we raise it all to the ground. And maybe we leave some of these because we need some of these centers to continue paying. But the threat exists that we will come back and do this all. The Babylonians, they might do a little bit more because they have a different idea of how they distribute power and land and how they do it. The Persians, again, shift some of that. They draw on older models and new models, but they restructure power around the temple. And they move that type of infrastructure into the temple system and out of the palace system. And the temple becomes the tax center, as it always had been. It's the place that those tributes go to. But now, well, let's cut out these rulers. We will appoint our own that go in, or allow one of you to rise up that we sanction. But it runs through the temple. And so that priestly class rises in power, and you get new types of combat between the priestly power and the royal power. And that movement continues from the Persian period into the Hellenistic period, where you see people needing to claim think of the Hasmoneans, you claim a priestly entryway in to then eventually claim royal power, but your royal power is also dependent on your ability to exert control over the temple as you then move and you're under, a Hellenistic ruler to continue on some of those things. Or once you move into a Roman, it continues on in the same way.
these are all experiments in politics.
Yeah.
One of the falls of the late Bronze Age was the palatial complex. Like, this doesn't always work. That's really part of the story of the Iliad and the Odyssey. It's like, this palace complex, no, it doesn't always work.
No.
It doesn't work. Odysseus finds, when he gets home, the palace is in complete disarray.
Shambles.
Agamemnon comes back, gets murdered. The whole thing falls apart. Needless to say, the reason they all went in the first place. So the palace complex doesn't work, but we've got these. Okay, so if the palace complex doesn't work, what do we do? Obviously, we need, a chief in charge of something, because we've got food that needs to be distributed. We've got all these things that we need somebody to take our chaos and create order. Mm-hmm. Who does that? Okay, and it's all experiments.
The Odysseus model with the Odyssey, I think, is a good one in thinking of, it's a criticism of the palace system and also a defense of it at the same time. Because when the good king is gone, the palace falls into ruin, and these bad actors, the young suitors, are there overexerting the land. They are taking too much. They are eating into the king's stores too much, and also taking from the land in a way that is abusive. And here's what it looks like when this falls apart and when it runs amok. But it's when Odysseus returns to institute a good idea of rulership, that it's a criticism of its weaknesses and a defense of, when the right person is there, then the land is happy and the land is fruitful and the land is protected. And so what type of
son
Yeah. What type of ruler do we need? We need that one who is wise, the wily Wade Odysseus. We need, think of a Solomon. We need the one who is able to exert military power and fight. We need, so which you go towards some of those ideas of judges that, or a David. You have these same types of things, but there's traps within that, because if you lean too much on, well, Odysseus was gone because of the honor system and because of the calls of the alliances that were made. And so there's protection in those alliances, but there's also weakness in that if our forces get called away, we can be eaten from the inside or taken advantage of from the exterior. And these forces, the young suitors, are sometimes the neighbors and sometimes more distant powers trying to come in and take over your kingdom so it can colonize it, take its resources, and send it back to another area.
And the Hebrew story is basically saying that even kings can be evil, do wrong things, and then we pay for the sins that they do.
Mm-hmm.
Because and arguing with the judges, do we stay with judges? Do we have a king? Look what happened when we had a king.
Samuel says you're not going to like it. Your kings are going to take the best of your produce. They're going to take your daughters to be perfume makers and bakers. They're going to take your sons to be soldiers. This is what a king is going to do to you. They will be worse than the pharaohs. And the people say we want it because it provides us protection and stability in a way that the judges, the local warlord rulers, don't. There's a reason we have to keep going through this cycle, if you read through Judges, of over and over again we're being oppressed by someone else. Is it because, like Judges said, they did wrong? Or is it because this is a part of that give and take of local polities and politics expressing themselves? And the way we can escape that is through a Saul who is wise, maybe sometimes not, depending on if it's a pro-Saul or a pro-David text, has a military ability, certainly earlier on. Or, we fall back into that, does a united kingdom ever really exist? Or is this an explanation for how we are maybe connected to those people up north or down south in a way that we like but maybe doesn't like? And do these traditions come from up north or down south or somewhere else or where?
I mean, the story of David and Bathsheba has always irritated me, where I'm like, okay, he's not really such a great guy after all.
No, David is not a great guy. Wife stealer in chief, David, you got the stealing of multiple individuals. Probably steals Saul's wife, steals Uriah's wife. You have 3 of David's wives that are connected to other individuals. The text makes sure to say either God kills them or David does, but it's actually someone else that does it, and oops, bad, punished, but then you're okay. Or maybe does steal on the way to then try to take power that Saul's really mad about, but maybe we try to hide. That David, the man after God's own heart is the one who has too much blood on their hands in order to build the temple. And this is what it means to be king.
That's why the story is, so now he can't build a temple. Bad David. So now we go on to Solomon.
Yeah. And a different reading that people probably have heard, or if you haven't, you should know, is that, well, maybe some of these stories are also, they are criticisms of David, because not everything is pro-David in the text. Some things are very pro-Saul in the Saulites. But we might also be needing to create a reason for why David didn't build the temple. And do these types of narratives help serve a purpose now that explain why David couldn't and why Solomon needed to? Because if David is the one, then this is really what they should have been doing. And if he didn't, is it because, maybe it's because, well, we have this warrior David, that and the idea of blood guilt. David Shepard has a great book on David and blood guilt. Then maybe this is one of those things that as we build the system out can become a reason why David couldn't. And so it's still a criticism of David because he shouldn't have done these things, but he gets excused. He moves into the right way. You're still going to have 2 Samuel 7, a descendant for forever. David's not cut out. And then it becomes one of those ritual purity things. And that's why David couldn't do it. And Solomon becomes the one who can. And so we're trying to protect David at the same time in our memory of this Davidic line and their legitimacy, because if they're cut out from the cult, then ooh, are we okay with them?
Sort of, it's similar to Moses does all this work, but he never gets to Israel. Can't go. Oh,
No.
it's because you got pissed off and you
Hit that rock.
You broke stuff. You had had a temper tantrum.
Yeah.
Really? After everything that he did, I'm surprised he didn't have 15 temper tantrums.
Yeah, you hit the rock when you're supposed to talk to it, and you get cut out.
That's it. You're out of it. You never make it over.
You get to take a peek. You get to take a nice visual journey through the land that you're never going to get to go into. And whether it's, did Moses really hit the rock? I mean, if Moses existed and all those types of things. Or is it that the Aaronite line, who become the priests, really need a reason why the Mushite line isn't able to be the priests? And when you were the one who was, you weren't a priest, but you were the prophet and the priest, you're the one who consecrated the tabernacle. You had to do the sacrifices, Moses, so that the Aaronites could eventually do sacrifices. So why isn't it your descendants? You're related through Levi, but and then the little stories can come in, or maybe all of it is a retrojection of kingship back into earlier things too. Angela Airsoft
become the king. He could not become the king.
Is this a criticism?
Almost that simple.
Limits of power.
In my mind, I'm like, oh, if he had gone to Israel, they would have made him king.
Yeah. Is this?
And that's not the story at that point in time.
It's George Washington stepping down, except here it's the divinely forced stepping down. We're going to institute term limits, and it's you hit the rock and
no, it's okay. No. Oh, really? No. Really? Okay, put it on my head. And that's the story. He stepped down, which, is allows you to tell the story of the judges. Because if he had been king, where do you go from there? Needless to say, you couldn't tell the story of Joshua. I mean, all the stories would have gotten screwed up at that point. Because Joshua is the commander in charge, and he's king. It doesn't fit.
Yeah, it would fall. Joshua's role would have probably shifted more towards what we see with a Joab under David, where you are, they're a military commander and you're exerting things, but what exactly is your leadership capacity versus following orders capacity? And does that fit when we're looking at regions that don't know that type of unified soul leadership of kingship that Moses is maybe flirting with, but again, could be flirting with if you are amenable to the idea of the discovery or the creation of Deuteronomy as a pious fraud in the temple as a way to help centralize and legitimate the Jerusalem cult in a way that helps priestly power and royal power. And then are there ways that king can push back the explanations for their rule and the model of their rule into an ancestral period that gives a reason for why I should, it's always been, it was Moses that did this, in a way that we see similarly done in the return from exile, where that ancestral law becomes an important thing, that these rules aren't new. These rules were instituted way back, and you have forgotten about them. And this is when the land was good, and this is when and that's why we should return to this, that importance of memory and the fear of it, the threat of it, the benefits of it all connect together into the creating of the thing that ends up surviving in the way we have.
And if we do this in retrospect, there's so many models that need to be so many things that need to be addressed, and we redact some things, we re-edit some things, and we're constantly doing it so that there are versions. And which story are we going to tell this time to tell the story that we need to tell? And then they get all condensed. And what? And what? We have the Bible? Is that what you're saying? No, we're saying open the door. Now she's watching. Yeah, okay. So, there's so much richness in reading these books, all of these books, any of these books, which is why I ended up a classicist, because I just followed the story, then read it again and said, oh, we're talking about something else, and then found some sort of matching situation in another culture and realized this is fascinating stuff. I will forever be amazed. I will never take it for granted. And while I know there are those people that feel that it's faith and that it's religion, and I get it, but I also say that read a little beneath and above, and it will be just as fulfilling. I really do believe that. We're not, the scholars and the historians, they're not trying to disprove anything. An archaeologist is not trying to say, no, we have absolutely no, there's very little proof that there were actually X people, because we haven't found it in the record until we do. But right now, they don't exist. The archaeologists and the historians are trying to find records to match stuff up. Let's not fight each other. Let's do Bible and archaeology.
They can be friends, regardless of your approach, as you're saying. Our position is you're better served from whatever approach you bring, the more you know about it. And you can have a critical approach that exists with a faith approach, that exists without it, but to ignore what's there prevents you from asking questions that can help you better understand it from whatever way you come into it. And knowing what is in the ground or what isn't, it doesn't change your ability to step towards a text and to read it. But it should be able to change the questions that you ask and the things that you take away out of those moments. When you can say, if this city wasn't destroyed when this text wants it to be, and maybe they also knew that, then why are they telling the story the way that they are? From whatever side you come to. And so that is our belief, that there's so much good scholarship that's happening, that the criticisms of they're always trying to tear things down. Are there individuals that are just out to grind an axe? Yes, like that exists. This does, and it's unfortunate. But most people are not. They are just deeply passionate about these materials. They love it as much as you do, and they want to know more. And their hope is that the little things can help you want to know more too, with the ways you want to take it in hopefully responsible paths.
I can't leave it at a better point. I can't say anything better than that. Although I could go on and on about it, because I just love this stuff. I love it. If I could have a little school of peoples coming around and just throwing these ideas around with different specialties, it would be that's my, if you could ever speak to anybody from the dead, who would you invite to dinner type of a thing? I'd invite all these people to dinner and throw all these ideas around.
Yeah.
Because it's just fascinating. What if, who did, when did they do it? Who could have talked to who? What did they think of each? I thank you very much for coming on.
I'm always happy to get to talk about this kind of stuff. It's my favorite stuff. Like, it's such a selfish joy to be able to read and study and talk to people about this stuff all the time. So I'm always happy to try to do whatever I can to also let people know, like, academic study of this stuff, it's not scary. It's more accessible than most people think. And there's lots of really good stuff out there that you really love. And maybe you just find those avenues to help you get in, because it doesn't mean you have to go back to school. You could, but you can also read the books. You can pick them up and start on your way in, and you'll like what you find.
What I found, and I'll leave my audience with this, is that there's not such a hard line between identities, that many of us are a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of the other thing, and that's okay. That's okay. And then tomorrow I change. Thanks, Jordan.
Thanks so much.
That's a wrap.